Europa Estonia. Silja Europa Estonia. Silja Europa Viking Estonia.
Estonia.
Mayday.
Estonia, Silja Europa. Are you calling Mayday? Estonia, what's going on? Can you reply?
This is Estonia. Kuka se on siellä? Silja Europa Estonia.
Yes, Estonia, this is Silja Europa.
Hyvää huomenta, puhutko sä suomea?
Joo, puhun suomea.
Joo, meillä on nyt tässä ongelma. On paha kallistuma oikealle puolelle. Uskon, että yli 30 astetta. Voisitko sä tulla apuun ja pyytää myös Viking Linein apun?
Joo, Viking Line on tässä perässä ja meni varmaan tietoon. Me voitko antaa sun position?
Siis meillä pätkitään, meillä on blackout ja emme saa nyt, mä en osaa sanoa sitä
Okei, selvä, ryhdytään toimiin.
Silja Europa Estonia.
Estonia ja Silja Europa.
Mä sanon sulle paikan nyt.
Joo, anna tulla.
59 latituutia, pieni hetki. 22 astetta.
Okei, 22 astetta, selvä, lähdetään sinne.
Elikkä siis 59 latituutia ja 22 minuuttia.
59, 22 minuuttia longituudi.
21.40 idästä.
21.40 itäistä, okei.
Todella pahalta näyttää se nyt tässä kyllä.
Joo, ja pahalta näyttää, me ollaan tulossa, ja se oli 21.40.
Tien päässä sä olet.
Recently, a new documentary came out about the sinking of the ferry Estonia, where one journalist named Henrik Evertsson tries to find out what really happened to the Estonia and why she sank, using new and modern technology and also making a new dive down to the Estonia. It's become some sort of coming of age ritual for many here. I've had many trips over the Baltic Sea to Finland and to Sweden over the years, so I somewhat have an idea of how horrible this tragedy might have unfolded. From a very young age in the early 90s, I used to sail with my mom to Finland many times a year on very similar ferries like the Estonia, to the point where I even started to wonder, might have I perhaps been on board the Estonia, as it had multiple name changes over the years. The ship was launched back in 1980 under the name of Viking Sally, which it served under for 10 years. Later it became the Silja Star and briefly was even named as Vasa King up until 1993, when it finally was renamed to MS Estonia. Now, a cold stormy September night on the Baltic Sea is nothing too out of the ordinary, but it still can give you the creeps when trying to find some sleep in the middle of the dark Baltic Sea in your tiny little pitch black metal cabin. Estonia started its final voyage on the 27th of September 1994, a little after 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night. The ferry was delayed about an hour because some military type trucks needed to get on board. The weather report gave a storm warning for the night, but it did not stop the usual ferry traffic. The Estonia managed to get almost halfway across to Sweden when the first incident happened. About 5 minutes before 1 o'clock in the night or early morning, a time when most of the party to Sweden on board is in full swing, although a lot of people at this time already did hit their cabins to get some sleep, or at least tried to get sleep as the sea was very rough. Thanks to the survivors, we now can get a rough idea on what exactly happened next. The storm supposedly was so rough that the ship was like diving from wave to wave. Some people thought the ferry should have slowed down in rough seas as it was almost impossible to walk on board. At that moment the speed of MS Estonia was around 25 km per hour and there were 15 to 20 meters per second winds outside. The waves on the sea reached about 4 to 6 meters high. And then the first big hit came, a single big bang.
Lite efter 12. Då smäller det till 2 jättekraftiga smällar.
Det låter som att fartyget åker genom is.
Jaa.
Olen autotekillä, siinä alles käis õudne prahmakas.
Sa näed midagi? Kas kõik lukud on omal kohal?
Ei, ma ei näe midagi erilist.
Mine ja kontrolli kohe üle.
This has been confirmed by the survivors as if the ship had just struck something. In the engine room, the crew members saw the water was spraying against the camera facing the ship's inner bow section. The main thing though was that the ramp was still there, but water was spraying in from both sides. After the first hit, people heard a second bang, and the ship started to roll even more.
Mine ja kontrolli uksed üle!
Need on rohelised, need on kinni!
Mis kurat see nüüd oli?
Mis teha?
Kontrollige ballast!
Pumpa ballast vesi teisele poole. Kogu vesi.
This is the moment when first people started to gather on the top decks near the escape exits. Some were undressed or even naked, which under such circumstances is a pretty wise decision. If any ship starts to make such noises and starts to roll onto just one side, then it's not wise to start searching for your favorite pair of jeans or your mobile phone or anything of value. You shouldn't even wait for your friends if they cannot keep pace with you. Immediately get out of the bed and start bolting upstairs to information desk and ask what's going on. The higher you make it on the ship, the better your chances of survival are going to be. Just because if the ship rolls onto one side, it will be very difficult to escape. You have to understand that you cannot even stand up straight when the ship rolls onto one side, as the cabin corridors are very narrow side to side, and if you get a roll onto one side, these walls are now your ceiling and the floor. It will be very hard to even crawl there, let alone walk when there are, hundreds of people trying to desperately use the same corridors. In total, there was about 10 minutes where you could hear bangs against the ship, in which time frame the ship started to list from 15 degrees up to 60 degrees onto its right side. This meant that everything on board the Estonia that was not bolted down to the ground went flying, and if you don't manage to avoid these objects, you might get killed by a runaway vending machine. This also meant that the escape route could only take place from the left side of the ferry, and with every passing minute the Estonia started to roll more and more onto its right side, where the walls were now the ceiling or the floor. If you haven't made it out of the ship by this point, then your survival chances is close to 0 to none, just because to climb up on the walls or the floor was almost impossible. Some of the survivors have said that they saw like 30 people holding on to just one single wall railing when it just came loose from the wall and everybody just plummeted down. You really needed a helping hand at this stage to get out of the ship. But it seems that there were some people there that did not just escape the ship, but as soon as they got outside of the ship, they stayed to reach inside and help pull as many people out as possible. At least those who managed to get as far up and, just needed a single last helping hand to escape. As the Estonia was now totally on its right side, it was almost impossible to launch any life rafts. So the only possible rafts to launch were the small capsules, but even those were very difficult to launch. Some that managed to get onto the side of the ship faced another horror. You see, when a ship or a ferry of this size is on its side in the sea, the bottom of the ship is a flat cliff's edge, which means you have to find some true courage to jump off that cliff into the pitch black cold and dark Baltic Sea and hope some broken windows, beneath the sea won't suck you back into the ship down below. At the same time, when people were fleeing for their lives, there were still some crew members left in the captain's bridge. The crew desperately tried to contact nearby ships like the Silja Europa and Mariella, which was difficult as the Estonia had just lost its power and was in complete blackout, and only the emergency generators were holding power to the vital instruments. Through some miracle, someone in the bridge managed to shout out the right coordinates, so the Silja Europa and Mariella started their way to Estonia. They were about 20 to 30 kilometers away, and at best pace they would arrive within an hour.
Mayday! Mayday! Silja Europa! Estonia!
Estonia.
Meil on probleem, tugev kalle paremale. Arvan, et see võiks olla 23 kraadi. Kas te saate appi tulla? Kutsuge Viking Line'i ka.
Jah, Viking Line on meie taga ja nad kuulsid kindlasti infot. Kas oskate ütelda, kus asute?
Meil on info sul, ma ei saa kätte. Ma ei saa seda öelda.
Meanwhile, inside the ship it was total chaos. Only the fit and strong survive at this point. So many who did escape later testified that in such a state of shock where nothing seems real anymore, you start to act from pure instinct, where you only care about saving your own life. You just have to cruelly crawl over people if you still haven't made it to safety. I wouldn't even be surprised if someone, started to punch somebody or even gouge out eyes just to get through a blockade of people. Many people just, froze in place from sheer fear and shock and did nothing. Now add to all of this terror that's going on around you that you're cramped between hundreds of people in small, tight corridors, and everything is almost upside down in the stormy, dark Baltic Sea, and suddenly all the ship's lights go out.
Kui kaugel te olete? Nüüd tuntuu tosi huonolta.
Jah, me oleme juba teel. Jõuame umbes 48 minuti pärast.
Only when the last lights went out on the ship did the surviving members of the crew from the engine room start their way up through the escape door on the side of the chimney. They came out of the chimney escape door just when the water was starting to come in from it, at which point the ship had turned almost 90 degrees. I just can't understand how they managed to stay down in the belly of the ship for so long just to keep the power on to the very last second. Just true brave stuff. Now, managing to escape from inside the ship to the outside, where do people find the courage to jump into the freezing cold Baltic Sea to try and swim and find a life raft in this storm? It's just horrible to think how crazy difficult it is to come out alive from such situations. I'm pretty sure most people were just, trying to hang on from the ship and just hoping that it won't go any lower and, rescue crews will miraculously come and pick them up, but this was just a false hope. Now, reaching a life raft, many still died of hypothermia. Many drowned in the life raft when the storm threw people inside like ragdolls. One survivor stating that it felt like it was like a book that you open and close. Many puked in the raft, so it was definitely not clean water there. And even if you still have the fighting spirit in you and you see in the distance ships starting to appear, another challenge comes. How are you going to be saved from this tiny little life raft in the pitch black stormy Baltic Sea? Many rafts just drifted far away from the ships into the nothingness of the Baltic Sea, and many lost their will to live from that. People that were finally picked up by the ships state that they actually killed many survivors with their way of rescue. Ships tried to pull up the life rafts full of water, and the raft just broke in half. Many lost their lives just when they were about to be saved. In total, 852 people lost their lives on this cold September night, of which 285 were Estonians themselves. 852 people, most of who are still trapped inside the ferry. How could this even happen? Is it really the fault of cheap welding job that broke loose the bow visor in the storm? So now, 25 years after the sinking, one team of people took on a mission to re-examine the evidence and do a brand new dive with modern equipment. This is not made easy by the fact that the sinking site has been named as a resting site for the dead, and any diving is prohibited by law, like people are calmly resting there. I personally do not understand why Estonia has not been risen from the seabed. It would have been no issue at all at that time for a ship of this size to be raised. Estonia lies about 75 to 80 meters deep on a muddy hill, from which in time it could start rolling further down the hill. Divers that were sent down to the wreck site straight after the sinking to help understand the condition and what caused the sinking of Estonia said that they could have brought up most of the dead without any big problems, but this was not asked for, so they just left them down there.
I was one of the divers approached to go on the Estonia, and myself and my fellow divers, we then went for an evaluation to make sure that we were all didn't have any problems with diving on it, because we knew there were going to be bodies. So we got to the site, set up location. We were given a dive plan. We were going to go into the cabins below the car decks, and the water depth on the Estonia actually was quite shallow. I think the bottom of it was 85 meters, which really, a free diver, you can hold your breath and go down to 85 meters, believe it or not. And it was all about, okay, Stuart, can you see anything inside the cabin?
Just below you, to your right, I think there may be a body.
Yeah, I've got two bodies here.
You've got two bodies here. Is it possible to get a close-up for the doctor, please?
Our job was to follow their orders. They said to us, okay, look here, look there, look across to the next cabin, come across a body, treat them with respect, move them out of the way. That's all you're going to be doing.
Okay, what they would like you to do is approach one of the bodies and they need a shot of the face on your HUD camera. Okay, we've seen enough, thank you.
During those dives, the guys, they would come back from their bell runs and we would discuss what we had seen, what we had done. And some of the guys, they were going through some of the areas and there were, you know, the poor dead bodies, they were everywhere.
There's another body as you go straight through the doors, yeah? Oh, there's loads of them there, yeah? Okay, mate. Are you okay?
Yeah.
The dive from the shopping area, there were quite a few bodies inside of there. There were definitely bodies trapped. The people were trying to escape out of the doors, some dressing gowns, running out of their cabins. They were actually still relatively in good condition. Some of them had lipstick on, still fresh as 2 months before. So one by one, pass them down, but they're always on the back of your mind. We're right here, why couldn't you bring them up? To not actually recover those bodies, you know, it was upsetting. As divers, we could have brought them up, it'd take a few hours. Wouldn't have been a problem.
There's nothing practical to stop us recovering a body. We put it in a body bag and put it in a basket and lift it up to the vessel. Sounds kind of cold, but You know, that's practicality is body bag, basket, lift it up to the surface. But it wasn't what we were tasked to do.
One of the most bizarre things to happen was the decision to cover up the ship with rocks and concrete, so the dead bodies would not start to float on the surface. Absolutely absurd.
Platsen där MS Estonia förliste ska betraktas som en gravplats. För att säkerställa att gravfriden respekteras ska fartyget täckas över och särskilda åtgärder vidtas för att ge gravplatsen ett rättsligt skydd.
Estonia skal nå dekkes over med stein eller betong for å hindre gravplyndring.
But what did the new dive to the wreck site reveal to us? A big 4-meter hole on the right side of the ship, exactly where it started to list when it sank. How did not anyone discover this hole before? The only thing we as regular citizens heard was that the Estonia's bow visor came loose in the storm, dropped into the sea, and the rush of water from the sea sank the ship. With this version, there are quite many things bothering me, one of which is that the crew working in the engine room at the time of the sinking saw with their own eyes through the monitors that the bow ramp was still in its place, but seawater was just spraying in from the sides. Can there really be so much water rushing in from the sides that would make the ferry list onto one side and then sink? Aren't the bumps supposed to bump out the water of this magnitude from the guard deck? Now, what's even more strange is the fact that under the guard deck there are more cabins for people, and after the first bang there were people already fleeing upstairs to get information on what just happened. Those same people who survived have said that they saw water rushing down the walls under the guard deck, which support the idea that there was a hole underneath the guard deck, if not multiple, because at the moment I can't tell if the new dive that took place in 2019 covered the entire side of the ship or not, or maybe there just was too much mud on the way to reveal anything more. From the new documentary though, it was very interesting to hear what one survivor said. He stated that the ship was like driving through ice.
Jag är inte alls den personen som brukar rusa ut oklädd, men urinstinkten får mig att direkt rusa ut i bara boxershorts som jag hade på mig, och när jag kommer runt hörnet så ser jag att det kommer vatten som forsar in längs med väggen.
The same man was also one of the first ones underneath the guard deck that got outside of the ship and saw something white reflecting in the sea, and asked himself if it could have been a submarine. Well, personally I believe if he saw anything it might have been the white bow of the ship that broke away, although I'm not really sure if it could stay afloat like that. But there has been many sightings of submarines in the Baltic Sea, so much so that even I here in Tallinn, Estonia would not think that much if someone said to me, "Hey, did you see or hear about the submarine today?" The Baltic Sea itself is not that deep as well, so might it be that during a rough storm there could have been a collision with a submarine? For a fact we know that we just got our independence back in 1991 from the Soviet Union, which collapsed, and the buying and selling of all sorts of Russian military equipment was widespread here, and the most shocking is that this had been done through the MS Estonia itself multiple times as recent as few weeks prior to the sinking. It comes into attention that Russia had even given out warnings that if this activity is not stopped, you will face resistance. So Russia at least knew about the transportation of their military-grade equipment on board Estonia. Might it have been that Russia sent out a submarine to spy on the shipment, but during very rough storm accidentally collided with Estonia?
When the Estonians finally got their freedom, they were very concerned about how long that freedom would last. So they turned to the West for help. They wanted the West to see them as a kind of country that deserved protection against Russia. And so their first priority actually was to set up a good intelligence service. So they turned to MI6 to help them found their new intelligence agency. The MI6 already had a long-term relationship with Swedish intelligence, so it was natural for the Swedes and the Estonians to get together with MI6 and run operations against the Russians. You got stuff out of Russia, you brought it into the country Estonia across the border, you took it to the port, you put it on a ship and you offloaded it in Sweden. It was a very successful route which they used for a number of years. My further investigation into the Estonia led me to a new source, an active service officer at MI6 who provided vital information about what really happened. He told me there had been 2 clear warnings from the Russians to the west to stop the smuggling operation on the Estonia. The first warning in 1993 went through diplomatic channels to the Estonians. It said, "We know you are smuggling, we know you are putting things on the ferry, you need to stop." Apparently the Estonians ignored the warning. The next year, in close proximity to the sinking, a second warning went directly to MI6. "We know you are running this smuggling operation, we know you are running it via the ferry Estonia, and you need to stop or else."
But here is a pretty big question mark. If a submarine really did hit the Estonia, then how did the bow visor fell off? And then I saw an illustration on the web that made me think a little bit differently. Namely, we have all most likely already seen the Estonia's bow visor through photos or videos that was raised from the seabed. When at first I thought, okay, the visor came loose, dropped onto the ship's front underwater nose and sank, and that's what made the dent into the bow visor. Well, now that this big 4-meter size hole was discovered, might it have been that the submarine just had a head-on collision with the Estonia instead? And also, if you notice, the damage on the bow visor is on the right side. The collision would have meant that many people on board fell on the ground from the sheer power of the hit, and I'm pretty sure the same case was inside the submarine, at what point both vessels would have been almost uncontrollable for a short little while. Just enough that Estonia was sent a bit onto the opposite direction, and as the submarine bounced back from the initial hit, it then came in for a second one as the engines were at full power still and hit the side of the Estonia, which caused the 4-meter hole, at which point it might have scraped on the side for a while as well until it came loose and steered away from the Estonia. This would actually explain the damage found on the bow visor on the right side of the bow visor and why it fell off, and also explains the hole found from the right side of the Estonia. And there might be many more holes there that were just not discovered because of the mud that is on the way. Now, coming to the restrictiveness of diving near Estonia, could it be that the same submarine is also right there next to the Estonia on the seabed? Sounds a bit unlikely, as I believe the bottom of the sea has been sonared already, but it would justify why such a high level of restrictedness is put upon the wreck site. Now, what I do wanna see from the new research and examination is proper material tests, microscopic tests that they do on, plane crashes and such, to determine if any sort of other colored material was in contact with the Estonia. Anything, So samples from the tinted part of the bow visor that has been lifted up from the seabed already, and samples from the newly found hole. Now, one of the more plausible causes are the cases that touch the newly installed side stabilizers for the Estonia. If you didn't know yet, Estonia had been installed with brand new stabilizers in breakneck speed that should help the ship stay a lot more stable in rough seas. So it would be logical that they were extended in rough seas. Now, some people are saying that the Estonia might have hit the bottom of the sea, with one of them which ripped a hole near the bottom of the ferry. Well, I mean, I have a real tough time believing that theory, as the Baltic Sea is about 60 meters deep average here, where the ship sank at least. No wave, in my opinion, could make it dive that deep, but it is plausible, I guess. But if indeed a submarine hit the Estonia, now there is a mass that could do damage to the newly installed side stabilizer. A bump into the bow visor first, and then started to scrape the side of Estonia instead of, hitting it head on into the side as well. Which means it would have easily taken the side stabilizer with it, causing the big 4-meter hole. Now, coming quickly to another completely different cause of the sinking that suits many other people is, could it have been a bomb, or bombs in plural, that were detonated on board? Because Estonia was discovered to transport these stolen Russian military-grade goods even weeks prior to the sinking on board the Estonia, and there were survivors that told they saw many military-type vehicles board the vessel that caused the Estonia to be delayed by about an hour, then it is possible that in the early 90s in East Europe, mafia or Russian secret service would have wanted to destroy the equipment rather than let it fall into the wrong hands. When we look at the newly found hole from the right side of the ship, we do see that it lies just between the guard deck and the lower cabins, where it would have been very easy to plant a bomb, and nobody could see it, and the detonation would mean almost certain sinking of the ship. Now, here is where I have a little bit of a problem with this theory though. Did someone really manage to plant a bomb next to the bow visor, and why? Detonating the bow visor seems just absurd in my opinion. If you wanna sink the ship, you just plant a bomb or two below the ship or on its sides under the waterline and be done with it. Who's going to go and plant bombs on the bow visor? It just seems a little bit unrealistic. So this is where my own investigation ends at the moment. I have a real hard time believing the official story, as it just sounds too absurd a little bit. And with the brand new evidence, thanks to some great 4K cameras and a team willing to risk diving to the wreck, we finally can have more certainty that the ship did not just sink because of the bow visor, fell off. We really do need a brand new proper dive to the wreck site and clear everything up once and for all. Or maybe even just raise the entire thing. Give the victims' families some closure as well, so they can finally bury their loved ones. Until then, there will be a lot of sleepless nights for many people out there thinking on what really happened to the Estonia.